Peace, peace, peace. Hello, revolutionary greetings and solidarity to everybody on this call and everybody who will watch this event. So we want to welcome students, community members, and activists, everyone who's joining on this call for the event. UC Santa Cruz graduate student and political prisoner, the case for Mumia Abu-Jamal. In the first part of this event, we're going to hear from leaders in the movement to free Mumia, student organizers, and we're going to get a special message from Mumia himself that was recorded today. So definitely looking forward to that. My name is Santiago. I'm going to be moderating today, and I'm part of a collective, the UC Santa Cruz Student Solidarity Collective for Mumia Abu-Jamal. We are a group of graduate and undergraduate students who are organizing in support of Mumia's educational dreams here at UC Santa Cruz, and more broadly, supporting the movement to free Mumia. As an incarcerated graduate student in the History of Consciousness graduate program on our campus, Mumia has faced numerous institutional obstacles here at UC Santa Cruz and at SCI Mahanoy in working towards his PhD. Since before the pandemic, he has been unable to receive his books in a timely manner and join seminar discussions in a substantive way. The experience stands in stark contrast to the experience of white incarcerated students in Philadelphia who are being driven to and from universities to work on their degrees. Since the pandemic began, those institutional obstacles have only intensified. Part of our work has been to pressure both our campus and the prison to support Mumia so that he can have a meaningful graduate student experience that he desires. We believe that supporting Mumia can teach us about what it means to ensure that prisoners have access to the opportunity to earn a graduate degree and to earn a graduate degree, how the university must be restructured to do this. So doing this work also offers us the opportunity to think with and learn from Mumia about how we must collectively envision and work towards the abolition of prisons altogether. So we hope that as you learn more, you can all join us in this work. We're going to be getting right into it today. So I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, who is going to be speaking on the updates in Mumia's case and also the updates on Mumia's conditions. That's going to be Pam Africa. So Pam Africa is the head of the international concerned Friends and Family of Mumia Abu-Jamal and the Minister of Confrontation of the MOVE organization. Regarded by many as the mother of the movement, Pam has been tirelessly spearheading the efforts to free Mumia for almost 4 decades. Today, she's going to be giving us updates on Mumia's current legal conditions, personal conditions, health conditions, and barriers that are being placed by the Philadelphia DA, Larry Krasner, who is progressive and anti-corruption in an outward-facing way, but makes an exception when it comes to Mumia because of the political nature of his case. Pam's wisdom and revolutionary love, paired with her will and fighting spirit, make her a force of nature. And we're very blessed that she's here today to share a message with us. So I'm going to introduce Pam Africa. Pam, are you there? All right, hold on. Pam, can you unmute yourself? Pam is the 215 number. If someone can unmute Pam, please. If someone who's a co-host can unmute Pam, her number starts with a 215 area code.
It looks like she's no longer on the call, Santi.
Okay, no, I don't see it.
Yeah, she'll probably hop back on in a bit.
Okay. So that's all right. We can tap back in with Pam when she joins in. So let's see, we can move on then and loop back. So yeah, we have next, we have a solidarity statement. The solidarity statement is coming from SAB, from Gabriela Santa Cruz. Gabriela Santa Cruz is a militant organization that organizes Filipino women for national democracy in the Philippines and seeks genuine liberation for oppressed Filipino women and all others against the fascist Duterte regime. So we ask for Sab to come on in and share a solidarity statement. Sab, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Cool, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity. Gabriela Santa Cruz stands in fierce solidarity with the movement to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. The decades-long struggle for his liberation serves as a testament to the unrelenting revolutionary spirit of the masses in the face of relentless capitalist corruption. We understand the police and the military as two hands of the same imperialist beast. We understand his persecution at the hands of the US government as intrinsically linked to the situation of political prisoners in the Philippines. With the passing of the anti-terror law in the Philippines, it has become increasingly difficult for activists to speak out against the fascist Duterte regime. The consequences being arrest or even death. For example, Reina May Nacino, who is an activist and young mother, was arrested for trumped-up charges of possessing illegal firearms and explosives. Her newborn baby, River, died while she was in prison, the state not even allowing her to see her own daughter before she passed. More recently, the arrest of the Luma 26, a group of indigenous children, teachers, and elders by the Philippine National Police demonstrate the fascist state's utter lack of regard for human life. The government of the Philippines, not unlike the United States, is prone to throwing activists in jail and framing them as terrorists in vicious counterinsurgent attacks. In the face of this relentless oppression, we look to people power as a source of inspiration in the fight to free our imprisoned comrades across the globe. To quote Asada Shakur, I urge you not to forget and not to betray our living heroes. If we ignore their struggle, we are ignoring our own. If we betray our living history, then we are betraying ourselves. We can save Mumia. We can save him, and we must save him. We, Gabriela Santa Cruz, look forward to continuing to work with the UCSC Mumia Abu-Jamal Solidarity Collective in the pursuit of freedom for Mumia and freedom for all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'm getting a message that Pam was just talking to Mumia, so we don't know if their availability, we don't know what their availability is like right now, but we're gonna try again. So if someone can try unmuting Pam to see if we could get a hold of her.
This is Pam.
On the move, Pam, how you doing?
On the move. I got disconnected some kind of way, so I'm on two lines, because one thing I know about this government, that you got to have plan A and plan B. So I got you on my cell phone and I'm on the regular house phone. On the move, everyone, and thank you for your participation. All I want to say is long live revolution. And when you least expect it, you're selected. And because I just got off the phone with Mumia about an hour ago, and he told me he believes that he have COVID. And he's saying that his breathing is very heavy. So when you listen to the message that was done this morning, and Mumia tries very desperately to do things, so that we could have an understanding of what's going on, not only with him, but with everything that is going on. Mumia is very ill right now. When he say he had COVID, let me tell you, Mumia does not let people know when he's sick. Every time we put information out about it, it was that we either found out from somebody else, or Mumia, the situation just so bad that, we got the information. He called me to, like I said, about an hour ago, and told me he believed he had COVID, and the department of the hospital there is stating that he don't. He said his breathing is bad. He said it feels as if some heavy weight is on his chest, and he said he's worried about his lungs. So I want to ask people, to please, before this is over, I'm gonna give you some numbers to call. Get your pencils and your pens, and now I'm gonna go into my speech about Mumia. And Santi said, Mumia is a revolutionary. And I'm going to tell you where he's at. After years and years and years of the battle for Mumia, we have gotten to the point that, in Saint Denis in France, there is a street named after him. The only time you get a street named after you, you have to be, living. I mean, you have to be dead. And, in Paris, Mumia was made an honorary citizen in order to graduate out the country of France. And you got to know the case of Mumia. And that's because students like you rose up, heard what the problem was, and immediately started acting, acting on that situation. That's how all those things happening. It was youth power. It was the colleges and, the youth in the street that, put the information out about Mumia. And in San Francisco, in '98, I believe, when we did millions for Mumia, and labor shut down the entire West Coast. 2 days for Mumia, one for a meeting and one to join in. Nobody went to work. They joined in a battle for Mumia. And at that particular point, Angela Davis was arrested. There's so many things I can tell you, about Mumia, but we were at the point where we are just about ready to bring Mumia home based on judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. We had a judge for the first time, a fair judge, because in all these 39 years in prison and dealing with Mumia's legal case, the judges was not fair. They wouldn't allow evidence, people to testify, on Mumia's behalf. So now he's languished in jail for 39 years. And when we get this fair judge to finally, put in so that Mumia can start, get a new trial, and some manipulation, went on there. And Johanna Fernandez, the film sister, and will be calling in, and she'll fill you in on some more details. This film is very important because it has the evidence to show that this government is in a conspiracy to commit cold-blooded, premeditated murder. And I can't, cold-blooded, premeditated murder, because when you sit down and you plot and you plan, and to kill this innocent man, it's in cold blood. Mumia, right now, can come out of there based on the evidence that has been brought forth. And I want to state lawyers from across the United States. Oh, and speaking of colleges, the district attorney here in Philadelphia made some illegal moves, and he was refusing to let Mumia case be appealed, right? And when the Rebel Lawyering Conference, and that's this prestigious, group of lawyers and students was meeting up at Yale University, when they found out that the district attorney of Philadelphia was trying to block Mumia's appeal, he was invited to be the keynote speaker at this Yale conference and lawyering conference. These youth who knew what was wrong, knew that, what he did was illegal, that what he was doing was wrong, they got together and they disinvited him, and they made Mumia the keynote speaker. Now, that was a heck of a blow to a so-called liberal DA, Krasner, when they disinvited him. So he turned around and attempted to do the right thing, but what happened, the Fraternal Order Police put pressure him, and they went and got Mrs. Faulkner Berkovich, which was the widow of Officer Faulkner. They went and got her, and they came up with this King Bench thing, which actually stopped Mumia's case for 6 months. Nothing could go on. And in between that time, I don't know what happened to Krasner, the pressure or whatever. He came out and said Mumia is guilty. There's no evidence to show that Mumia didn't have a fair trial, and that there was no judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. But one of the biggest lies that he said in there, one that really bugs me because they were all horrible. What they said was that when the police brought Mumia into the emergency room after he got shot, you'll see all this, in the film, that they brought him and laid him down on the floor, and that Mumia was just twisting, he was refusing to walk. And the thing was, Mumia couldn't walk because when they came on the scene, they immediately went to Mumia, started beating them, blackjacking them, kicking them with them steel-toe boots and all that they wear, and rammed his head into a pole. His head was split wide open. The forehead was split wide open, blood gushing from out of there, and he was shot. That's how come he couldn't walk into the hospital. But the DA did not tell that. This isn't something that I didn't see it, but witnesses saw that. And they also testified to this. There was a doctor by the name of Coletta said that Mumia could barely speak above a whisper because he was so weak and his lungs had been saturated, had been the blood, and it was causing him not to be able to speak. So that's just a little teaser into what is going on. But at this particular point, when you see the movie, and I have these numbers for the district attorney's office that people can call, and for the numbers to the prison. And the number to the district attorney's office is 215-686-8000. This is District Attorney Krasner's office. And the other number is to the prison where he's at, where they're saying he don't have COVID, 570-773-2158. I want to thank y'all for, tuning in at this particular time. And one more thing I want to tell you. When you see evidence, you'll find out. No, I'll let Johanna handle that. So look, thank you so very much. I'm getting ready to make a lot of more phone calls and get people into the street tomorrow to shut it down. Because we cannot allow this to happen. And the only reason why it's happening is because the district attorney have not done what he was supposed to do. And he let 15 other people off our prison and are based on judicial and prosecutorial misconduct. And when you see in that film, it reeks with it. Thank you. On the Move, long live revolution. Hey, welcome to the revolution. On the Move.
On the Move. And long live revolution. Thank you for that message. So again, this is an urgent time, and this is the first time that this information is getting out there that Mumia thinks that he has COVID. So again, we can't stress or urge this enough. Pam is like asking that you call. So I'm gonna read those numbers again. Krasner's office is 215-686-8000. And the other number is gonna be 570-773-2158. Mumia Abu-Jamal is a revolutionary elder. He joined the Black Panther Party when he was 14 years old and started writing prolifically for their newspaper. And he's been targeted by COINTELPRO since the age of 14. And so when Pam talks about Mumia being, like this is like a plan, this is like all a setup, they really want Mumia to die in prison. That's what this government wants. And so, but we haven't let them do that. The movement to free Mumia has not let them do that. He was sentenced to death row initially, but because of the power of the people, they were able to successfully get him off of death row. And so now what's next is getting him out and bringing him home. He's an elder, he's 66 years old. And so it's really important that we call those numbers. I'm going to read them again really quickly. It's 215-686-8000 and 570-773-2158. So go ahead and call those numbers and demand for the immediate release and unconditional release of Mumia Abu-Jamal. So we're going to hear more on that from Johanna later on in this event. But for now, we're going to give folks more information on Mumia's status as a graduate student under the History of Consciousness department. So I'm going to pass the mic to Will Parrish. Will is a graduate student and he's in the same cohort as Mumia. So we're going to hear more like about the work that graduate students are doing to support Mumia in having a real experience of graduate school here at UC Santa Cruz, despite the countless barriers he faces as an incarcerated person. So I'm gonna pass it off to Will, who is a PhD student and in the same cohort as Mumia Abu-Jamal in the History of Consciousness department. So Will.
Hello, everybody. Greetings. It's a real honor to be speaking at this event with so many people who do such incredible work and who have led such incredible lives. I want to send greetings especially to the other UCSC students as well as faculty and staff who are on the call today. I know that from being part of the UCSC Mumia Abu-Jamal support collective that about half the people who signed up for this event are not affiliated with UCSC, and about half of you are affiliated with UCSC. So I know many of you are learning about this incredible human being, Mumia Abu-Jamal, for the first time on this call. And Mumia Abu-Jamal is a PhD student in the History of Consciousness program at UC Santa Cruz, and I cannot emphasize that strongly enough. The whole reason we're having this event is that Mumia is affiliated in this way with UC Santa Cruz, and therefore, just like all of us who are students, is pursuing an educational experience, but doing it in an incredibly different context from the rest of us. And so, you know, as a member of Mumia's cohort, I've had the privilege of sitting in on seminars with Mumia, reading some of his work. He's incredibly insightful and incisive work that he's produced in seminars. And I'm taking an independent study with Mumia right now, where I've had the opportunity to discuss Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon with Mumia, among other works. And I think that I'll just briefly share that, you know, the work that we're trying to do as graduate students and other students in supporting Mumia mainly focuses right now in a few areas. One is that we're trying to get access for Mumia to use conference room services within the prison so that he can participate more meaningfully in his educational experience. We're also working to provide more support for the labor of supporting Mumia in recognition of the fact that Mumia, as an incarcerated person, requires a lot of extra support to have the educational experience that he's looking for. So we're organizing around those things within History of Consciousness, among other people in other departments. And I think that what Mumia's status as a graduate student asks of us are, you know, a couple major questions. One is, what does it mean for an incarcerated person to pursue a PhD at our campus? And what responsibilities does that entail from us to support a person in that position to try to create a model that that can be used in other contexts, you know, where incarcerated people are pursuing the same thing. Also, Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the leading figures of abolition, of, you know, the liberation of all people of our time. So what does it mean for us collectively and politically for someone who is such a significant person and occupies the position Mumia does to have Mumia as a student here? What does that entail for us? And so I think that's the question we want to pose. What are the implications politically and collectively of this very special situation that we're connected to? So thank you very much.
All right. And so without further ado, I'm gonna play the audio from Mumia's message that was recorded this morning in a conversation with Johanna Fernandez, who we'll hear more from later, and Mumia.
Well, listen, I don't have anything prepared, but this is like straight off the biscuit. So, initially you ask about, what does it mean to be in the joint?
This is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
And also be studying for a PhD in the United States of America. I think it reflects two poles of existence in the society, specifically this one. And it's the pole of the highest level of state repression, counterpoised with the ideal of human liberation, that is to say, knowledge. And so it's a contradiction, right? It's a contrast. And very rarely is someone in prison able to do that. And as we know from our experience, there has been resistance to that attempted liberation by blocking and obstruction that is.
Sorry about that. Let me pull that back up. My apologies.
Well, listen, I don't have anything prepared, but this is like straight off the biscuit. So, initially you ask about, what does it mean to be in the joint?
This is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
And also be studying for a PhD in the United States of America. I think it reflects two poles of existence in the society, specifically this one. And it's the pole of the highest level of state repression, counterpoised with the ideal of human liberation, that is to say, knowledge. And so it's a contradiction, right? It's a contrast. And very rarely is someone in prison able to do that. And as we know from our experience, there has been resistance to that attempted liberation by blocking and obstruction that is really beyond the pale. Because, again, as I said the other day when I was speaking to the students, what kind of state dims the light of knowledge? What state does that? And why? Why would they, when that is the very antithesis of their supposed function, right? The other question you asked was about students and the role of students.
This is a call from Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy. This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
In liberation struggle. I thought about when I was a child, and I think I was probably a preteen, and my father would finish the newspaper and I would pick it up and try to read it. And I remember seeing on the news and seeing in, sitcoms and seeing in the paper various demonstrations by college students where they would, 10 of them would try to get into a phone booth. And I never understood it. And I was like, what are they doing? What does this mean? Because it was, on its face, it was kind of silly. Years later, of course, when you have more information and more context, you look back and you see that these people were practicing their privilege and their ability to be silly precisely because they were on the brink of moving into corporate and business life. Also, think about this. This is the 50s and the early 60s. The Vietnam War was raging. But if you had entree to a college, you were exempt from the draft. So these were literally people practicing their privilege prior to entering the world of business, right? I say that to say that young people especially rarely are able to really analyze, study, and then see, view, taste, feel the contradictions in a given society until they're in college. Because that is their first opportunity to really get true information about the society in which they live. And so many people, once they see that, they join movements to transform society, because to not do so, to sit back and see those contradictions, is literally intolerable, right? We saw, when I talked about the people who used to crowd the phone booths, someone is going to have to be explained what that was. The other polar opposite of that was the explosion of student movements against the Vietnam War and the growth of groups like the Students for a Democratic Society, the Weathermen, and other type organizations that were really organized around students, because students formed the core of a resistance against the war in Vietnam.
Can you break down the phone booth analogy again? Who did you see crowding the phone booth?
Oh, this would be like a gag photo in a way in a newspaper, but you saw it all across the country, and it would be young men for the most part, because back then, you know, college was a male endeavor. And it would be 10, 11, 12 guys squeezing into a phone booth. And their dress, their age, everything would be reflective of their college status. And, you know, it was like, I could never understand it. I'm like, why are they doing this? What does this mean?
And what did it mean?
It meant that they were practicing privilege, because by virtue of them having a college ID, they would never be drafted into the war effort in Vietnam. So they were, as students, existing as a caste above other young people, right? Because of their potential corporate connections when they graduated. Because the function of college was to give people access to a bourgeois middle-class life, right? Working class people, poor people, black people, Puerto Rican people were the grunts in Vietnam. And while there were officers there who did have, you know, like college educations, they were mostly from, you know, military schools.
Can you give me a sense of what would be your highest aspiration for carrying out the PhD at UC Santa Cruz in terms of conditions?
Well, to accept and relish the opportunity is important, of course, but also to use it as a platform from which to further intellectual and theoretical work about mass incarceration, the nature of the state as an carceral state, and also inspiring other people to pursue those kinds of interests.
Now, materially, in terms of your conditions and how you actually get there, what would you want to experience as a student in the process of getting a PhD that you might not be experiencing right now?
Well, I am experiencing it in this sense. I'm experiencing resistance. experiencing oppression, silent state oppression that has no material reality that can be logical, right? Why would the state do that? Obstruct someone's attempt to secure a higher education. Why would the state do that when it's the very antithesis of its function in terms of the so-called the prison industrial complex? One would think that education being a social good that improves all that it touches and expands consciousness would be the very essence of the correctional program, of the prison program. But it is not, because it too is class-bound and hide-bound to the castes and classes in society. And it is a system of control. The essence of control is the ability to say no.
So what would you want? You know, you wrote this book, We Want Freedom. What do you want for your PhD program and your experience in it, concretely, as a student, in terms of students' needs?
Really, I mean, in many ways, I'm getting it, because I'm getting work with other people in the cohort on questions dealing with liberation struggles around the world.
You have 1 minute left.
And resistance to the empire. But I'm getting it like sideways in a way.
What about like being able to access the classroom? What about that kind of realm and getting your books on time? And
you know, that happens so rarely that if it began happening, I wouldn't know how to handle it. You know, like when you get resistance, you know that you're walking on the right road. And when you don't get it, you feel like you're failing somewhere. So, you know, resistance is the essence of the empire. So you know you're fighting against the empire when they're fighting against you.
wow. Well, what I wish for you is ability to access the classroom. First of all, it'd be great if you could just show up in the classroom one day. I'm here and I'm free.
Thank you for using security.
Love you.
Goodbye.
All right. So we just heard from Mumia Abu-Jamal speaking with Johanna Fernandez, who, and that conversation happened just this morning. And like Pam said earlier, Mumia is not going to show it. He's not going to say it, or, you know, it's going to be, it takes a lot for him to admit that something is going on. And so we heard earlier from Pam today that Mumia told her that he has COVID. And so this is something that is really serious. Mumia is an elder. And while he may come off as cool, calm, and collected in this amazing audio recording, you know, I do want to just remind folks that, you know, Mumia said that he thinks he has COVID. And so, yeah, one thing, so yeah, we're here putting this event on in the spirit of resistance, because it's been over a year since Mumia has been accepted into the History of Consciousness department, and every step of the way it's been resistance. And so to speak on that more is Johanna Fernandez. And so I'm gonna just get right into it, because we've got a lot going on in this event. So Johanna is an assistant professor of history at Baruch College in New York, and editor of Writings on the Wall, Selected Prison Writings of Mumia Abu-Jamal. And she's also the author of The Young Lords, A Radical History. And she also has a morning show, and also speaks with Mumia regularly, and is one of the lead organizers in the campaign to bring Mumia home. So Johanna is going to be joined and interviewed by Citlali Aparicio, who is an undergraduate student in the History of Consciousness department and a wonderful abolitionist thinker. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Johanna and Citlali.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Like Santiago said, my name is Citlali, and I'll be in conversation today with Johanna. Johanna, before we get started, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, I'm Johanna Fernandez. I think Santiago introduced me. I'm an associate professor of history at Baruch College of the City University of New York, and part of this incredible movement to bring Mumia home. I'll just say that if Mumia called Pam, he called the top dog, pretty much. And I talked to him this morning. I will say that we did speed up that recording that you just heard because Mumia was speaking slowly. I'll also repeat what Santiago mentioned, and that's that Mumia is Mr. Superman, so he doesn't ever show vulnerability. I mean, this man was sentenced to death and faced execution 3 times in the 1990s. One was very, very close. So he's had to steel himself. It's also just his personality that he doesn't express vulnerability or needs. So I kept on asking him, Mumia, what do you need in the program? You need something. You need books, you need access to the classroom, you need your syllabi on time, you need support. And he came to be called the voice of the voiceless in the 90s when there was an international movement organized to save his life, like tens of thousands of people marching all over the world, including workers in Brazil who literally went out on strike to stop his execution. It's a massive movement. Mumia was the face of the movement against the death penalty and against mass incarceration in the 90s. I forgot my train of thought in part because I'm a little concerned, but he became known as the voice of the voiceless because he mostly has dedicated his life to writing about oppression and the struggle for freedom here in the United States, everywhere. And rarely does he talk about his own condition and the ways in which the state has attempted to end his life on multiple occasions in the courtroom and outside of the criminal justice system. So this is really an urgent moment, especially given that Mumia fell ill about 5 years ago because the state refused to give him the cure to hepatitis C, and we had to sue the state to get him the medication he needed to survive. We won, but as you probably know, hepatitis C is a disease of the liver that leads to liver cancer and death. And his liver was compromised because the cure for his hepatitis C was delayed. So he has pre-existing conditions. But Mumia is also a very strong human being, and he has an incredibly powerful and fierce spirit, and a very young spirit. So I'm confident that we're going to get through this, but we're definitely going to need to push. We're going to need to call the prisons. We're going to need a strategy. And in fact, the movement is convening tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to figure out a plan together. And I can send out the information to those who email me. In terms of the link, the Zoom link.
Thank you for sharing that, Johanna, and we'll definitely tap in about that meeting later, and hopefully others on this call will also join. Just to get started, how did Mumia Abu-Jamal become a grad student at Santa Cruz in the HISCON, or History of Consciousness program?
Okay, so Mumia has written 1,000,001 books from prison. And I've talked to him about getting a PhD. He's just that kind of nerd. I mean, we usually joke around about the fact that he's the biggest nerd housed by the carceral state. And in conversation with my colleague, Mark Taylor, who's a theologist at Princeton Theological Seminary and also the founder of Educators for Mumia in the 1990s, we had been having this conversation, how to do it. It's not easy to apply for graduate school or college from prison, by the way, for all kinds of different reasons. First of all, everything is done online now. So you have to register online to submit your application, and Mumia does not have access to the internet. So that was a hurdle. But also graduate programs demand that students literally be residents in the state where they're doing the program, and that they show up to class, which wasn't going to be a possibility for Mumia Abu-Jamal. So we applied previously to other programs and got an enormous amount of red tape from the administrations in those schools, even before we applied. But at the 11th hour, in this second attempt to get Mumia to apply to a PhD program, we thought, wait, why not UCSC and the History of Consciousness program? Because this was the program where Huey P. Newton got his PhD. This is the home of Angela Davis. This is the place. And it was just like randomly, I thought of it randomly, and I talked to Mark, and then I called Mumia, and Mumia was like, duh, yeah, why didn't we think of this before? So it was the last thing we thought about in the process, like the last school. You know, sometimes the most obvious thing is in front of you and it escapes you. It was that kind of a thing. And of course, when we told Mumia this, he got really excited. He was like, oh my God, it would be such an honor to walk that path. And so it wasn't easy to get in, by the way. There were all kinds of hurdles, administrative hurdles. But one of the professors called us and asked, is this a real thing? Like, can this really happen? And can Mumia do this? And Mumia is just one of the most disciplined people I know. So that wasn't going to be an issue. But how could we do this objectively? And in fact, we drafted a letter, a strategy for how this could happen and how graduate students could form part of this process that would be incredibly exciting, but that would also establish a precedent for other incarcerated people to follow, not just at the level of the PhD, but at the level of the undergraduate degree. This is important because right now, prison education is organized around do-gooder professors going into prisons. So prisons are still outside of the university. But this concept actually brings the prisoner to the university. So it censors the prison and prison life. And so this experiment could potentially, if we do it right and if people commit to it, it can become a liberatory site in the site that's unfree, in the most unfree site in American society, right? It's kind of the concept of building freedom prefiguratively in the context of this society.
Building off of that, what do you think the function of bringing these radical politics and these people who are currently incarcerated into the neoliberal university? What do you think that will do to the structure of the university? And you've sort of started getting into that.
Well, how am I going to answer this question? I'm a professor. I'm also an organizer and a radical. And I think of myself as part of the university and not of it. But when I made this film, Justice on Trial, the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, I interviewed Mumia's sister. And, I had been involved in the movement to free Mumia in the 1990s, the movement against incarceration and against the death penalty. And I was familiar with his case. And in fact, I had visited Mumia already multiple times, and he had spoken in my classroom. It was the first live from death row conversation that was had between Mumia and college students. And this happened at Carnegie Mellon University. So I interviewed his sister, and she began to tell me all of these intimate details about Mumia's life. And I realized in that moment that the reason why the state has been able to imprison so many Black American people, so many people of color, Latinos, is because they are depicted as menaces to society, lone agents disconnected from family, community, siblings, their children. They're dehumanized, right? And hearing these stories from the horse's mouth helped me understand that viscerally, something that I might have even argued in a talk I gave or presented, that the dehumanization of Black Americans and other people who are imprisoned is what has made possible their mass imprisonment. But when I listened to his sister tell me that Mumia's mother was orphaned when she was a child, and because of that, she didn't feel comfortable with intimacy and physical displays of affection, and that Mumia brought that to her because he would grab her up and kiss her and she would be like, "Get out of here, boy." That's not how I imagined Mumia ever. Of course, Mumia is an icon in my mind. Even though he was also a friend and a colleague, but there's nothing like having people speak for themselves, right? And part of what we like to do in the academy is speak for others. This is a moment of allowing the subaltern to speak, literally, right? The least of these, like Mumia just said in that recording, that for him to be in a PhD program is a meeting of polarities in society. The most oppressed and unfree condition meets the institution that aspires to achieve the highest liberation, education in the most pristine and idealistic sense of what that could possibly be. So we love to study all of these issues: imprisonment, the most unfree condition in American society. But ultimately, it loses its humanity if it's devoid of the people who are affected by it, right? And it's not just about bringing in the humanity, but part of what I learned when I started visiting people on death row, when I started visiting Mumia, I visited him, but I visited others, is that the United States imprisons brilliant people all the time. Brilliant. I mean, these are people who are not children of a lesser God. These are people like us who were at the wrong place at the wrong time and who ended up in prison. And so I think prisoners will deepen not just our humanity, but because they exist in such a marginal place in society, their perspective is unlike anything most of us who haven't experienced incarceration can even wrap our heads around. So philosophically, experientially, and intellectually, the prisoner has historically made a huge impact on society. Think about Antonio Gramsci. Prison notebooks, right? There is a long history of prisoners contributing tremendously to our understanding of society in a deep way. We owe an enormous debt to Antonio Gramsci for his elucidation of ideology. So this is an instance of being determining consciousness. Being in the most unfree site in society offers a depth of understanding that many of us can't access. Think about Malcolm X and his contributions to society. So part of what bringing Mumia to UCSC can do, not just Mumia, but also other prisoners, is a transformation of our understanding of reality, among other things. I mean, I kind of feel like we stand to gain.
I totally agree. I think that's such a important to recognize the contribution of not only Mumia, but also all of the thinkers that have come before him, like Gramsci, and everyone who will hopefully come after him and into the future. For now, we have a couple more questions to go through, but for now we're going to transition to the film screening and pick this back up after, where we can maybe have a larger discussion with everyone else on the call too. So thank you, Johanna. And now to Santi.
Right. Thank you, Citlali. Thank you, Johanna. So just before we get into Johanna's film, Johanna mentioned if you're interested in the call tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time, you can email ucscmumia@gmail.com. We're also going to be sending a follow-up email with our next event, which is going to be on March 6th. But you know, the point of this meeting is to let everybody know that we're all involved in shaping this work, and we want more and more people to join in. So we're going to be sending an email with the next event. We're also printing a Jamal journal. So there's going to be future in-person meetings where we'll be able to share the newspaper. Yes, so that's the next event. Freedom has never been so close. But if you have any questions, you can email the UC Santa Cruz, UCSC Mumia at gmail.com. And again, I'm going to read the phone numbers really quickly one more time. The DA's office is 215-686-8000. And SCI Mahanoy, where Mumia is imprisoned, the phone number is 570-773-2158. So Pam is urging people to call and to demand the immediate release of Mumia Abu-Jamal and that he gets immediate medical help. So we're going to get right into the film screening. This is Justice on Trial, the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. And we're also, we're also going to be continuing this conversation, like Sitlali said, after the movie. So if you have any questions for Johanna or anyone else, go ahead and type those in the chat, and we might be able to answer those. Thanks.
Quickly, also want to mention that we are calling for a follow-up organizing meetup the first week of spring quarter for UCSC folks. So we'll send out an announcement about that also. With more details, everyone's invited to follow up and be part of the organizing.
I think I was working as a nurse on 11th shift, and one of my brothers came to my job and said he had just heard on the radio that something had happened and both of our brothers were involved. One was in jail and one was at the hospital. So I left work, and since one was in the hospital, that seemed the most critical, so I went there first. And I found Mumia.
There was a fire that I was photographing, and I had just gotten done taking those shots, and I heard the call go out on H-band that an officer was down. And I flew. And from where I was to there, the most it could have taken me was 12 minutes.
When I saw Mumia in the room, I really didn't know who he was. The police beat him up. His face was all swollen, lips was busted. That's why I couldn't recognize him. He was just so distorted.
I saw the blood on the pavement. That was Officer Faulkner's blood, so I saw it up close and personal within hours after it happened. And I mean, I knew nothing about Mumia Abu-Jamal and anything of the sort.
He was out, and I shook him, and I told him he needed to have surgery, and he accepted that. And that's when he told me, you know, he hadn't shot anybody.
He was found at the scene with a bullet from Danny's gun in his chest. Danny's laying on the ground. They find Mumia's gun right there at the scene. Danny shot 4 times with Mumia's gun. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He did it.
This individual assassinated a police officer in Philadelphia.
I've lost all respect for the court system. I just don't feel that a slain officer can truly get justice anymore based on what I've seen with that case. I'll go for abolishing capital punishment the day after he's executed.
If indeed Brother Mumia is murdered by the state, it will be one of the most grave and darkest hours in the long night of terror in this country.
29 years after the murder of Officer Daniel Faulkner, the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal continues to raise controversy. For both sides, this is more than just a trial. It is a battle over what justice means in America. The following sequence of events, described at trial by the prosecution, has long been the official account of Officer Faulkner's death. In the early morning hours of December 9th, 1981, Abu-Jamal was moonlighting as a cab driver. While waiting to pick up a passenger on a street in Center City, Philadelphia, he witnessed a confrontation between his brother, William Cook, and a police officer.
He runs over and takes out this Charter Arms revolver and fires and shoots the officer in the back. The officer then manages to turn around a little bit because of the momentum of the bullet. It did not affect the vital organs at that time, and was able to get off a shot at that time, which hit Mr. Jamal in the chest area. He then, that is Officer Faulkner, continued to fall down. And as he fell down straight on the pavement area, he was, for all intents and purposes, debilitated. The defendant, Mr. Jamal, at this point, having been stopped, went over and straddled the officer, took both hands and held the weapon that he pulled out previously and fired 4 times. One of the shots, that is the second shot or third shot, we don't know which, actually went through the, in between the eyes of the officer's head. That was the killing bullet.
I grew up with Danny's 2 older brothers, Tommy and Joe. We were born and raised in the same neighborhood, all in Southwest Philly. I've known the family my whole life. Danny was a nice kid, he really was. I've seen the evidence, I watched the trial. Mumia killed Danny Faulkner. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that he's guilty. No doubt at all.
On July 2nd, 1982, Mumia Abu-Jamal was sentenced to death, but irregularities continue to shadow his case.
I started Crime Magazine, an internet publication that covers a broad range of crime issues. Innocence cases are one of our specialties, prison treatment. I started doing research, thinking I would write an article about the case. Since I was familiar with Mumia as a reporter, I had an interest in writing a case about him, just to see where it would take me. The crime scene investigation, well, I don't know if there even really was one.
Even on television, they handle investigations better than this was handled.
Pedro Polikoff, a freelance photographer, was one of the first persons at the scene of the crime. His photographs were dismissed by the prosecution. Rediscovered 27 years later, the Polikoff photographs offer important new evidence.
And there's the guns in the officer's hands. If this photograph was presented in court, they would have dismissed that evidence instantly as contaminated. There's no way that you're going to get a good fingerprint or anything off of a firearm that's been handled for upwards of an hour by somebody else. If you were a juror, what would you think if you saw that?
Smell the gun. Tell me it's been fired. Feel it. See if it's warm. If you fired a gun, there's these powder residue on your hands. Test that. So when the cops say they didn't do any of these tests, it just rings so hollow because these tests are so elementary that the only thing I can think of is that they were all negative.
Polikoff's photos also illustrate other discrepancies at the crime scene.
You'll notice right here on the top of the Volkswagen, we have Officer Faulkner's hat. This is the shot that the newspaper picked up. You'll now notice that Officer Faulkner's hat is down on the ground. I thought the man was guilty. I thought they had the murderer and that he had killed a police officer. And as far as I was concerned, he was supposed to fry.
It's clear evidence that the police changed things around to paint a picture that they wanted to convey to the jury.
Everything was not kosher. It wasn't done the right way. Something was up. I don't know whether he's guilty, whether he's innocent. I don't know who did it. But the man at least deserves a fair trial, and a fair trial means presenting all of the evidence. And if these photographs are evidence that that jury would have considered prior to sending a man to his death, then you know what? They should have seen it.
Taxi driver Robert Chobert was one of the prosecution's key witnesses.
His first statement is, the shooter ran 30 feet away before collapsing. Well, Mumia was shot at the scene and didn't run anywhere. He's down right below the curb next to the police car. So now they've got a problem with how can a guy who's lying down in the gutter here next to the police car have run 30 feet away? It doesn't make sense. So they re-interviewed Chobert, and he now says, all right, maybe it wasn't 30 feet. Let's say it was 10 feet. So he shaves it down to 10, but it's still 10 feet more than he ran. Now here's a guy on probation for throwing a Molotov cocktail into a schoolyard during the school day. He's violating the probation for driving a taxi cab without a driver's license. It's been revoked for 2 DUIs. His big lie is he parked right behind the police car. This guy wouldn't park behind any police car. He would go the other way every chance he got. If his parole was revoked, he was looking at 30 years in the penitentiary for throwing this Molotov cocktail in. So this guy's not taking any chances about casually being associated with a police officer that he doesn't have to be associated with.
Polikoff's photos also cast doubt on Chobert's testimony.
Apparently, the path that I took to come around the scene to get photos put me right through where a taxi cab was supposed to be, that a witness was in. There's no taxi cab there. There was no cab driver that anybody was talking to. And I walked right past the cruiser in order to take the photographs.
According to police testimony, Abu-Jamal provided prosecutors with the most compelling evidence of guilt. He confessed to shooting Officer Faulkner.
I walked over to him to look at to see who had just shot and killed my partner, and he had shouted out that I shot the MFer and I hope he dies. He said it once more, and I leaned over and responded that he shouldn't die, you should.
It's hammered into you in police academy and throughout your career that getting a confession is crucial to a conviction, and moreover, with the killing of a cop, a brother officer, you really want that conviction.
Gary Bell's at the hospital that night. He gives a statement to police. He doesn't reference any confession from Mumia or talking to Mumia.
I didn't write any notes at that time. I made no notes. I talked to detectives at a later date and informed them of the statement.
In fact, it took more than 2 months for Officer Bell and others to come forward and say that they had heard a confession from Abu-Jamal.
So several months go by. It's February. Well, the prosecutor's name's Joe McGill. He has a roundtable discussion with some of the police officers, and Officer Gary Bell tells McGill, and it's hard for me to believe that McGill didn't solicit this, he heard a confession, by God.
And the fact that it came out in a room of cops sitting around talking with the prosecutor leading them, there's no way that that wasn't faked evidence. Plus, we have testimony from other people who were there that it didn't happen.
I was with Jamal from within a moment or two of him being brought into the emergency room, throughout his entire time in the emergency room and on into intensive care unit. And he neither made any confessions to me, nor did he say anything that would be even remotely in the way of a confession to any other individuals.
When he was put in the paddy wagon, there were 2 officers assigned to stay with him from that moment until he went into surgery. One named Gary Watskill and another named Steve Trombetta. Watskill said, the Negro male made no comments at any time when he was in my presence. Now, since these are in police reports, the prosecutor knows about them. So does the defense, allegedly. So when the confessions come up in court, it just finally dawns on Mumia's court-appointed attorney, Anthony Jackson. Hey, I remember one of those cops saying that he didn't say anything. This is the last day of the trial. He goes to the judge and says, Judge, I've got a rebuttal witness.
That would have blown the lid off somewhat of this trial. Even with the circus, the prejudicial circus atmosphere surrounding the trial, with all the cops in the courtroom with their guns and uniforms, it would have opened some eyes on the jury had they heard that, because it just flat contradicted what the prosecution had been arguing and trying to show.
The prosecutor says, I don't know where he is, Judge, and it's too late to call him in anyway. Mumia had read, though, in one of the documents about Watsco, no vacation. He was confined to the city. And Mumia stood up and read this to the court. It says right here, Judge, he's not allowed to be out of town. He's here. Watsco was under orders from police department and probably McGill to be available in his home in Philadelphia. He could have been there in 30 minutes. The judge said that we haven't got the time. Probably the only lighthearted part of this whole trial was Mumia said, I'll go find him. And the judge said, you know, I'll bet you'd like to.
This is an example of prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecutor's job is not just to convict, but to see that justice is done. And why in this case did the prosecutor cover this up? Why was he so afraid?
The single most important fact people should know about this case is that there was a fourth person at the crime scene.
I was standing on the corner of 12th and Locust, just chit-chatting, girl talk, and then we heard gunshots, like, pop, pop. And I looked across the street to my left ankle, and I seen this white person falling. And I kept looking, and I seen these two black individuals running away from him. I started to walk towards, but I came back and just got out the area. And regardless of what anybody says, I know what I saw. These eyes don't miss too much, not too much.
4 eyewitnesses there told police that they saw 1 or more black men run from the scene. Those who told police that they saw someone running away were intimidated out of their statements.
A few months before Veronica Jones was scheduled to testify in the Abu-Jamal trial, she was arrested and jailed on a robbery charge.
I couldn't make the bail. So I was sitting and I was visited by 2 white males in suits, but I was told they were my lawyers. So when I went down, they told me that they were detectives, and they were telling me how they could work a deal with me. They told me all I had to do was name Mumia as the shooter, Mumia Abu-Jamal as the shooter, and that they would make sure that I got off on 15 years, 5 to 15 years, and also any other charges that I was already in there on, which were a number of charges. And they said that they had helped Cynthia White out, so they would help me out also. And you don't know how good that sounds to somebody that's going away for 15 years. I was totally confused. I didn't know what to say. I'm looking at a man I've never seen in my life that I'm getting ready to lie on. And I'm looking at these officers that can put me away. So I just thought I didn't see anything. Sorry.
After her testimony, Veronica Jones was released and given probation on all her outstanding charges.
When Faulkner was brought to the hospital, in his shirt pocket of his police uniform, there was a driver's license application that led right to Kenneth Freeman.
Who is Kenneth Freeman? Kenneth Freeman is the business partner of William Cook. They were like this. Ike and Mike look alike. If you saw one, the other was either right beside him or not too far away.
The driver's application never surfaced at trial because the prosecution did not divulge that it had been found in Officer Faulkner's pocket. The name Kenneth Freeman was never mentioned at trial. He's eluded us all these years because the prosecution hid his presence from the defense.
We will always suspect that was Poppy Freeman. Poppy grew up in the project with us, and he and Bill were very, very close. They started their businesses together. They both were street vendors at one time. He had a good relationship with Moo too, but he and Bill were closer to the same age, so they hung out together.
That's why I called it the framing of Mumia Abu-Jamal. I mean, they know there's another person at the scene. They know it's Kenneth Freeman, and yet they act as though there's only three. They do this deception to hang this crime on Mumia. A couple of years go by, Freeman's body is found bound and gagged, nude, in a parking lot in Philadelphia with a needle sticking in him, dead.
When you have people like Poppy Freeman, who was involved in the case, who mysteriously died, or you have people who were witnesses to the case who were intimidated by police officers, when you see that people were threatened by police officers, make us very afraid.
Good evening. The U.S. Department of Justice filed suit against the city of Philadelphia, its mayor, and other officials, charging they allowed constant brutality in the city police department. The suit said people in general were abused and denied their rights, but the main victims were blacks and Hispanics.
In 1979, the federal government filed the first ever lawsuit charging city civil officials with aiding and abetting police brutality. That legacy of police brutality is parallel to an equally ugly legacy of corruption.
A federal grand jury indicted 13 Philadelphia police officers.
One of the biggest cases of police corruption in modern United States.
In Philadelphia today, 7 former policemen were found guilty of corruption. Former Deputy Commissioner James Martin and 6 others.
Shortly after the Jamal case had gone to trial, the federal government prosecuted the police department of Philadelphia for corruption.
15 of the cops who worked on Mumia's investigation went down on FBI convictions, including the deputy police commissioner who was in charge of the entire Mumia investigation.
It was bribery, extortion, manufacturing of evidence to win convictions, all the things that would lead to the kind of faking of evidence that we know went on in the Jamal case.
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Green and is subject to monitoring and recording.
Some ask what makes my case special. People are only able to ask that because they don't really know about many other cases where false testimony is used, or biased judges sit, or alleged constitutional rights are violated at whim.
The many problems in Mumia's case plague thousands of cases every day in our court system, and those are usually the cases of young African and Latino men who aren't afforded the kind of justice that those who are able to pay for it have access to.
For many critics, the Abu-Jamal case has become a symbol of the relationship between the criminal justice system and people of color in America. That relationship was shaped in the cauldron of the civil rights struggles of the 1960s and 1970s.
There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality.
Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. Well, what did he say before he articulated his dream? He articulated the nightmare. And he was saying, many of you are here weathered by police brutality.
By the end of the 1960s, as the violence escalated, the civil rights movement became transformed.
How often haven't we seen our poor, downtrodden people killed on the streets by the police without a cause?
Eventually, the civil disobedience strategy of sit-ins, boycotts, and marches gave way to a more radical kind of activism, one that aimed to defend itself against violence. This new militancy was exemplified in the Black Panther Party.
I was beaten into the Black Panther Party. I remember me and about 4 or 5 brothers from North Philly went to a demonstration in South Philadelphia. It's at the Philadelphia Spectrum, which is a big sporting arena. This was 1968, and it was the presidential nomination of George Corley Wallace III.
I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Every one of us got our asses kicked by plainclothes policemen. From me having to go through that and seeing the complete lack of power of people to resist that, I was attracted to the Black Panther Party. So because there was not a functioning, active Black Panther Party in Philadelphia at that time, we founded one and built one. I was in my mid-teens at that time.
The FBI and the Philadelphia Police Department began their surveillance of Abu-Jamal during his membership in the Black Panther Party 15 years prior to his arrest for Officer Faulkner's murder.
At first, my mother was kind of like, boy, what you doing? You better not go to jail. You better not get in no trouble. You know, just like a protective mother. But I heard my mother say, yeah, he's out there doing this when he was in the Panther Party. You know, it's like, you could hear the pride. You could hear that she was glad that he was doing something, but not out in the street, gang warring, not doing drugs and those kind of things. The Black Panthers came out of a condition. The condition was that we were being backed against the fence, mistreated by police officers, shooting down people in the street, you know, stuff that's happening today. And the Panther Party felt like they could make a difference by policing, by looking at what police officers were doing, observing, taking names and numbers. But on the other hand, they would be and could be confrontational.
We tried every day, 7 days a week, to love and serve our people. We served thousands of children every day, hot and healthy breakfasts in many cities. We held free clothing drives. We had free medical treatment centers in over a dozen cities. Those are some of the programs that we instituted every day or weekly in 44 cities and branches across the country.
As this new radical politics empowered Black and Latino communities across the country, it also tapped into some of the nation's worst fears. In Philadelphia, the backlash against these movements was particularly extreme.
Our campuses are in turmoil. Crime is rampant in the streets. Morality is in decline. And old ideals and traditions are being challenged.
Frank Rizzo was the former police commissioner, came up through the ranks. He got to where he was by being a very tough guy.
Only in America could a guy like Frank Rizzo be elected mayor.
He was law enforcement, hard on crime. We're locking them up. We're not taking any nonsense.
This soft line attitude that is now prevailing across the country must stop.
And that's the mentality that was here in the 70s. He was the big tough sheriff in town, and as mayor, he was going to make sure that the streets were cleaned up.
The right-wing surge that we saw as Law and Order was a direct reaction to the Black Power movement. Frank Rizzo was an overt white power politician. At a speech in South Philadelphia, he said, "We want white power," quote unquote. Those were his words, not ours.
These are anarchists who print venom, kill the pigs, kill this. They should be arrested and confined to prison where they belong.
Anyone who was perceived as radical, anyone who was critical of the system was targeted for police abuse. In November of 1967, Black students in the city of Philadelphia hold a protest in front of the school district. They're asking, yes, for the teaching of Black history, But they're also asking for roofs to be fixed so they don't get rained on, and to have heat in the schools in the wintertime, and to have school books that are not circa 1944 in 1967. Rizzo unleashed his police department on these peacefully protesting students. Over 24 students were put into the hospital. So this is the city that Mumia grew up in.
Frank Rizzo is a paradigm of things to come. If you look across America, what you see are people trying to repeat the kind of politics that he brought to fore.
Today, a violent crime is committed every 60 seconds, and it will get worse unless we take the offensive.
We shall have order in the United States.
By the late 1970s, a new movement of black radicals caught the attention of Mayor Rizzo and the Philadelphia police.
There was an ongoing battle in Philadelphia, police against MOVE, Rizzo against MOVE. MOVE being back to nature types, composting in the yard, lots of pets, all in dreadlocks, total counterculture deal. This brought the worst out in Rizzo.
The police will be in there to drag them out by the backs of their necks. They're going to be taken by force if they resist.
Most of the media treated it as the MOVE people were barbarians, and Mumia treated them as urban revolutionaries willing to stand up to a totalitarian guy like Rizzo. It had a boiling point in 1978 when the police destroyed the first MOVE compound. They put in these thousands of gallons of water into the basement to flush them out. And there's hundreds, maybe thousands of shots going toward this house. One of these shots in the crossfire kills one of the stakeout officers named James Ramp. There are 11 or 12 MOVE adults in this house at the time. All are arrested and charged with Ramp's murder. Mumia covers this trial and is aghast at how could a judge find 9 people guilty of killing one man with one bullet.
Sitting in a trial, in an official capacity, objective as a journalist, and seeing that kind of naked injustice, it rankled me to the core. All the rights that are supposedly guaranteed to a people, the right of self-representation, the right to self-defense in your trial to defend yourself, were summarily stripped and denied. Never in my wildest dreams would I ever think that it would happen to me.
Don't tell me about the Valley of the Shadow of Death. I lived there. In south central Pennsylvania's Huntington County, a 100-year-old prison stands. I and some 45 other men spend about 22 hours a day in 6 by 10-foot cell.
One day, I get a manuscript, and it's called Live from Death Row, a group of vignettes about people on death row. Mumia has written 7 books. 6 of them have been published by me. Every one of them is still in print. When I think of what he could do as a teacher or as a broadcaster in the general society, this country is missing so much to have him incarcerated when he could be the best teacher in the world.
Jamal is more famous than he was when he was convicted. He's now a prominent, well-known international figure on death row and a journalist, writes about not just the American legal system and prison system, but he writes about all kinds of political issues that get attention around the world.
In 2000, Amnesty International published a report claiming that the case failed to meet minimum international standards safeguarding the fairness of legal proceedings. Its report called for a new trial.
People in Philadelphia haven't read the Amnesty Report because when the Amnesty Report came out, the Philadelphia Inquirer put the Amnesty Report on page 2 of its B section as a news brief item, 55 words long. And virtually no other newspaper in the country covered it. The Daily News didn't cover it at all, and neither did Channel 3, 6, 10, or KYW News Radio. So this information about the case that other people around the world access easily, it's just like it just doesn't exist in Philadelphia.
His writings, his talks, everything that he's come out with has been a great support for building, social justice movements worldwide.
Mumia's fighting for me like he's fighting for my children.
He represents a whole community of people like me who are men of color, who are subject to racial profiling by the police. So that's why I'm here, because he represents us. He represents me in a lot of ways.
We know that it is not about just Mumia. We know this is about our children. We know this is about all those who stand up as people to power. We have the right to demand justice. We have the right to demand that we be treated as human beings. We have the right to do that.
An international movement has mobilized to save Abu-Jamal's life. In Philadelphia, an equally passionate movement demands his death.
I'm a teacher. Who are you? Why don't you tell us that? Why don't you tell us that?
Stop shaking. Your camera will take a better picture. We're a police organized motorcycle group, the Philadelphia Centurions, exercising our constitutional rights. We don't believe in this so-called person. He was convicted by a courtroom of his peers over 25 years ago, and the man should be put to death.
Those pushing for Abu-Jamal's execution have a powerful ally in Philadelphia's Fraternal Order of Police.
Our brother, police officer Dan Faulkner's life was taken from us as he sought to protect his fellow citizens, your people, from that certain harm that faced them at the hands of another who was determined to carry out evil deeds.
Police officers hear a gunshot, they run towards it. Civilians run away from it. The average cop probably goes out on the street every day and does his job to the best of his ability, despite what happened to Danny Faulkner. I believe, down deep inside, that had he been executed, justice would have been served. That would make police officers in the city of Philadelphia feel that they are being supported and backed up by the system, which they all believe in. They believe in that system or they wouldn't be cops.
He murdered a police officer. That's about it. We're not going away. We're not going away.
Anybody who supports this killer is tacitly saying that they sanction the murder of police officers.
Let's talk a little about what happened this week. Rage Against the Machine is a rock group that came to Philadelphia. They performed at the First Union Center.
Well, we don't have a rock group here. We have a hate group put to guitar music. Two of their biggest hits are Killing in the Name and Bullet in the Head. We're not talking Peter, Paul, and Mary here.
Across the country, it represents a case of justice denied. There's no new evidence, and all the evidence presented remains uncontroverted. And still, the system has not had the integrity to carry out the verdict. If it had been a murdered judge, the guy would have been executed 20 years ago.
This man has just sat here and lied. Bullet in the Head is about cops killing black men, shooting them in the head. Rage did make it very clear that they are not about cop killers. And you know that they are calling for a new trial for Mumia Abu-Jamal. They made it very plain. And again, this is the intimidation that these people have used on people like Veronica Jones. They're talking about the FOP history, this government history. And again, it points to what liars and bullies these people are.
This is complete, utter, absurd nonsense. This continually repeating call for a new trial is a cheap charade. If Jamal publicly admitted what he did and apologized to the Faulkner family for the horror he's put them through for 18 years, I think this issue would be put to rest. But
they are convinced that Mumia killed a cop. And there's no middle ground to you killing a cop. We have an element, and I couldn't tell you where it comes from, that keeps putting out that vindictiveness, that keeps putting out that retaliatoriness, that keeps grabbing people, and it's like, if you don't go along with what we say, we will get you.
Officer Faulkner's widow, Maureen Faulkner, has no doubt that Mumia received a fair trial.
It's emotional to think that victims have to endure things like this for 25 years.
Maureen Faulkner is the widow of slain police officer Danny Faulkner. Michael Smerconish is a conservative radio host and columnist based in Philadelphia. Their new book is called Murdered by Mumia, a life sentence of loss, pain, and injustice.
Maureen Faulkner always contends that those who support Abu-Jamal are dupes and dummies, and they don't know the true facts. But when you look at the facts in the case, the true facts, you will see that there are problems here. There are problems that merit a fair adjudication of this.
There are some photographs that have been released by supporters of Mumia, and they were taken by a freelancer named Pedro Polakov.
At some point in time, I called the district attorney's office and I said, I was a photographer on the scene. I have photographs of the scene. If you would like to use them, please call me. Never heard anything from him. And I was calling them because I thought the man's guilty. I've got photographs, you can use them.
The defense attorney says he can have a field day with these photographs.
Where have these pictures been for 26 years? I mean, where have they been? Why hasn't this man come forth sooner than now?
Does it ever cross your mind that perhaps they're right? Do you ever allow yourself to consider the fact that perhaps he didn't do this?
He murdered my husband in cold blood, and there is no doubt in my mind.
I don't think Maureen has ever thought, what if we execute the wrong guy? I don't think she cares. I think she just wants someone to die because that is how she's been fed all of these years. I have to assume, as a human being, Maureen Faulkner was married to her husband, loved him, they had a relationship, and when this happened, she was totally traumatized. I also believe that the FOP needs her to say, I want this man killed so I can move on with my life, or I want this man killed because he killed my husband. If Maureen Faulkner isn't there to push that my loving husband, please, they wouldn't have a stone to stand on. Justice for Daniel Faulkner is that they find who killed him. And that will also bring Maureen peace too.
Has she suffered in this? Yes, she has, but so has Mumia's family. This guy has been on death row for 25 years. His children, who were babies, are now adults and now have their own children, and he has never been able to touch them, kiss them, hug them, hold them in 25 years.
He's our father, he's a grandfather, he's innocent, and he should be home. I remember Mumia carrying my baby sister on his shoulders, and we going to the park, and him making sandwiches for us, and then we wake up, and he's gone. And it makes me sad because the memories, they're just memories now. He's been a father through letters and a father through phone calls. I'm 32 years old. I've been going through this since I was 6 years old. I'm tired of it.
Hello, who we have here is Miss Dolly. This is Goldie's daughter, her one and only, the love of her life, and one of Mumia's many grandchildren.
We love him so much, and we're not going to stop until he's home.
Put your hands together for Goldie, y'all. Where you at, Goldie?
What's up? What's up?
Yo.
Goldilocks, call me Gang Wolf. Free Mumia, what you want? What's up?
The state is trying to murder innocent men, and we're not going to stand silent and allow it to happen.
I come from a struggle most people couldn't imagine. A 7, see my family burning Babylon's ashes. The fact is they were revenge for a crime never committed. Mumia ain't no killer, ask the deputy who did it. Listen, if your judge was your prosecutor's friend and you the defendant, how you think the trial gonna end? Exactly as it did.
When he started having children, you only saw Mumia with his children. You know, he would carry him on his back, or you could see, and you would see, he would come to visit my mother on his bike, and he would have one of his children on his back or on the bike or whatever. He always had his children, was always teaching. That was who he was. Mumia actually taught us how to be affectionate. My mother grew up without a mother and father. She was an orphan by the time she was 5. I don't think that my mother really knew how to be affectionate. And I think Mumia brought that to her. And he would always walk in and just grab her up. And my mother was all of maybe 98 pounds, maybe. And he would just grip her up and just, you know, these bear hugs and things. And she just, boy, get off me, boy, get out of here, get out, you know. One of the hardships was when my mother died, we couldn't be with him to support him. So that's something he had to go through alone. From day one, when I went to the hospital and found my brother in the hospital, he said, I'm innocent. And he's always said, I'm innocent. He being innocent and locked up all of this time, deprived of his life, his livelihood, his family, bothers the hell out of me. And it hurts. It hurts constantly that we can't touch him. We can't cry with him. We can't laugh with him. It hurts.
Fame and icons are always obscure. I mean, that's what they do in a way. It's made me less real to a lot of people. You know, I'm a poster or a book, perhaps. I'm not a living, breathing man like every other human being. And yes, I've got a family, a loving family, but they didn't sign up for this. So I rarely discuss them or mention them.
I have always maintained that the framing of Mumia started with them saying that here we have somebody on the crime scene, and this is the nigga who did it. I don't think initially they knew it was Mumia Abu-Jamal or even cared. They saw somebody with dreadlocks. They probably figured it was Move, you know, so this is a guy, we got him, and we're going to do this. But when you look at the context of police brutality in Philadelphia, in the context of systemic injustice in Philadelphia, what happened to Mumia happens to so many other people.
In Philadelphia, federal prosecutors are widening their investigation now into police corruption there, issuing subpoenas for 100,000 old arrest records going back a decade. It's all from the conviction of 6 officers for false arrests and brutality. The scandal has led to the reverse.
Good evening. The U.S. Justice Department opened an investigation today of the latest case of alleged brutality by a big city police force, black and white officers, against an African-American suspect. The incident in Philadelphia...
Almost on cue, every 3 to 5 years, there is a major scandal involving police corruption and or police brutality.
In the United States, Philadelphia police have launched an internal investigation into what happened during this traffic stop. After a high-speed chase, a handcuffed man is hit at least 7 times. The man, we're told, was later released without any charges filed.
There's a mindset in law enforcement across the country that the means justify the extremes. If you take that type of modus operandi and you overlay it onto a murder of a police officer, they're going to do all that they can to pin this on somebody. And that's what they did with the Abu-Jamal case.
I started in April of 1978 as a Philadelphia assistant DA. It was the mentality at that time of being aggressive, strong, carry the big stick mentality. The more aggressive you are, the more convictions you get, the more likely you are to move up and into more prestigious roles within the DA's office. That can, doesn't always, but can create some injustices along the way. There's no doubt that the killing of a police officer takes on an extra added incentive in a prosecutor's office. Because they work with the police every single day. It's like killing one of their own, in a way. I mean, you go over to the DA's office right now, there'll be 75 police officers in there prepping, working on cases, this and that. So there's a real bond between police and district attorneys. So when a police officer gets killed, there's a whole different mentality that the office takes on.
The prosecution is afforded enormous financial resources as well as time and personnel. The reason resources are important in capital cases is that investigators are needed, forensic experts, ballistic experts. Those all require money, not only to do the research, but also to testify in the actual case. And it is a sad fact that most capital defense attorneys have very few resources afforded to them.
If you're court appointed in Philadelphia, you're given a limited amount of money to do an enormous amount of things. I think when all was totaled up, I think for investigator, ballistics, pathologists, and other professional services, there was perhaps less than $1,000 that was used and approved by the court.
In political cases where the district attorney is invested in the outcome of the case, such as in the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, I believe those resources are unlimited. I think the state will go to whatever expense it needs to get a conviction.
Mumia was denied the right to trial by a jury of his peers because the peremptory challenges were used to eliminate blacks from the jury.
Both sides are trying to get the jury most likely to do whatever they want them to do.
In the 1980s, Jack McMahon made a training tape for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. The video detailed the tactics used by prosecutors in the office to get convictions.
The blacks from the low-income areas are less likely to convict. And as a result, you don't want those people on your jury.
The elimination of blacks from juries is a problem all over the country. McMahon's tape, unfortunately, detailed a common practice.
You know, in selecting blacks, again, you don't want the real educated ones. Again,
the process, by giving any individual these strikes to use to try to fashion a jury in their best interest, is going to result in certain classes of people being excluded. It's inevitable.
11 were excluded from sitting on the jury by the prosecutor just based on their race. Another jury was maneuvered off of the panel who had been seated, was replaced by a white juror who had actually said that he was biased.
Philadelphia is a city of 40% black at the time. You're supposed to get a jury of your peers, and it wouldn't be fair to say in this case that he got a jury of his peers.
The experience of black people with police is different. They're much more skeptical of police testimony. So to have blacks on your jury means that they're not going to accept everything that the police officer says just out of hand. And I think whites have a very different experience with police officers in this country.
Judge Albert Sabo was the original trial judge in Mumia's case. He was known as a political hack that favored police and prosecutors prior to becoming a judge.
Judge Sabo, by anybody's understanding of the system, was a prosecution-oriented judge.
He had presided over, I think, 31 death penalty cases. 29 of them were minorities. He had the most death row convictions of any judge in the United States.
As Abu-Jamal's case began, Terry Moore Carter was working in the Philadelphia courts as a stenographer. A few days into Abu-Jamal's trial, she overheard Judge Sabo make a stunning remark.
He
was speaking to another gentleman and made reference that he was going to help him fry the nigger. He had apparently made up his mind already without hearing any evidence that Mumia was guilty, and also made up his mind to sway the jury to make that same decision.
Sable's conduct during the trial was an embarrassment to anybody who's a member of the bar anywhere, I think, that any judge would be that bad, that flagrant in his racism and abuses. And Mumia was just ideal for him. Here we have an African-American defendant who was very outspoken against racism and injustice, who was very vocal, who wasn't going to meekly be led to slaughter as so many defendants are, who stood up and fought and said, look, I have a right to a fair trial. I have a right to be treated as a human being.
In speaking with other people and reiterating the conversation that I overheard, nobody raised an eyebrow or said, oh my gosh, or he didn't say that, or nobody expressed that they didn't believe me. I came to realize that this is the way the system is, that the appeal process will take care of it, so nobody's too concerned about it, and don't worry your pretty little head about it.
The problems with Abu-Jamal's case do not end with his conviction. Questions linger as well around his sentencing.
For whatever reason, Anthony Jackson did not put on any mitigating evidence, and there was plenty of it. I mean, there were people who were available to testify on his behalf. One of the most important pieces of mitigating evidence was the fact that he had no criminal record.
We aren't looking at a thug here. I mean, here you have an inner city kid, grew up in the project, single parent for the most part, and he's striving to get his education. He's going to college. He's trying to do the right thing, trying to take care of his family.
The only thing left was evidence that was put on by the prosecution to this article that he wrote when he was 15 years old.
The prosecutor literally brought in a tattered copy of an old newspaper article in which Mumia quoted from Mao Zedong about power stemming from the barrel of a gun in the context of the state having just murdered Black Panther Fred Hampton.
McGill, who was an experienced prosecutor, used that phrase to suggest to the jury that this was a man who was predisposed to going out to shoot police officers.
The prosecutor's use of Abu-Jamal's statements as a Black Panther also violate a Supreme Court precedent set in a case known as Dawson v. Delaware.
Dawson v. Delaware, that Supreme Court case in which evidence of the defendant's affiliation with the Aryan nation was found to have unfairly biased the jurors against him. Yet in Mumia's case, evidence was introduced of his former affiliation with the Black Panther Party, a clear Dawson violation. That alone could have been the basis for a new trial.
Abu-Jamal's attorneys appealed his conviction, claiming that he did not receive a fair trial. The presiding judge in his appeals hearing was Albert Sable.
According to the Code of Judicial Conduct and the common law that has evolved from it, judges are supposed to recuse themselves when their impartiality is questioned. Not that you have actual proof that they can't be impartial, but if their impartiality is reasonably questioned.
Remember, there was this incident, which should have had him disqualified. He was overheard saying, yeah, and I'm going to help them fry that nigger.
Given all of the animus and ire and controversy and contentiousness surrounding this case, Sable should never have heard Abu-Jamal's appeal, but he did.
Time after time, the courts have ruled that nothing was wrong with the lower court proceedings, and that's just not so. We have textbook examples of violations of Supreme Court precedents and gross prosecutorial misconduct that in most other cases, were they not so politically animated, would have been cause for a new trial or release from prison.
In Pennsylvania, the justices have to be reelected every 10 years. I think something like 5 of the 7 justices on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court have been endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police. So There's a tremendous pressure on them to please the Fraternal Order of Police.
So it gets put up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And at that point, one of the new members on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was a guy named Ronald Castile. Who was Ronald Castile? He was a former DA in Philadelphia. So Castile votes to reject the appeal, but then he issues a separate opinion saying why I'm not going to recuse myself. He says the defense is blaming me and saying I can't be fair because the FOP made me Man of the Year and they gave me money to campaign on and they gave me campaign support. And so they're questioning my ability to be impartial because of FOP support. Well, there's 4 other members on the court that received money from the FOP, and he named their names. So now we have 5 members of a 7-member court who have taken money from the FOP, which is the prime organization trying to get Abu-Jamal executed.
In April of 2009, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear Mumia's appeal.
We have an increasingly conservative Supreme Court that falls on the side of favoring law enforcement justices over due process interest. I don't believe they will ever take Mumia's case. It's too highly politicized. They don't want to take cases like this. And they're not brave enough to take a stand and do the right thing and say, egregious lower court violations, throw it back for a new trial.
Philadelphia seeks the death penalty more than any of the other 62 counties in Pennsylvania. When you look at straight numbers, Pennsylvania has more blacks on the death row than Mississippi, more than Alabama, second only to Texas. So that shows you a little bit about the racial cast of justice and how justice is applied here in Philadelphia.
There's approximately 3,000 people on death row in the United States. These are all individuals who spent anywhere from 2 to 20 years on death row for crimes that they did not commit. They were all wrongfully convicted, exonerated, and released, and all of these people are members of our organization who now speak out against the death penalty. There have been 6 individuals from Pennsylvania who have been exonerated from death row.
Think about it. Tom Ridge will make the changes we need. Life means life. Try violent juveniles as adults. Change rape and domestic violence laws and sign death warrants.
Tom Ridge signed hundreds of death warrants as governor. Obviously was notorious for signing death warrants more than any other governor in Pennsylvania's history.
Tom Ridge, when he ran for governor, one of his platforms was to sign Mumia's death warrant. He got elected, and he signed it. Ridge was a factor up until the point President Bush appointed Tom Ridge the Secretary of Homeland Security.
The death penalty in this country, I think, is really used as a stepping stone to higher political office. They talk about how they're tough on crime, and people love that, and they get elected.
The DA, at the time that Mumia was arrested and convicted, is now the governor of Pennsylvania. His wife is a judge on the Third Circuit Federal Appeals Court. People build their careers from the incarceration of others.
The system tends to want to almost ignore the fact that they've sent these people to death row for crimes they did not commit. One person has been exonerated for approximately every 9 persons who have been executed in this country. Now, the state will not acknowledge that. We know it's most likely that somebody who has been innocent was executed.
Eyewitness News.
Good evening. There's a verdict tonight in the murder trial of a Philadelphian accused of killing a police officer last December. Our Walt Hunter standing by live at City Hall with the latest. Walter?
The verdict, Diane, is guilty of first-degree murder for Mumia Abu-Jamal. I'm very pleased with the fact that the jury had the courage to come back with a guilty verdict in face of some very difficult circumstances.
The whole idea of the justice system demands impartiality, fairness, and attention to all the evidence. Weighed, you know, the lady with the blindfold is feeling the weight of the evidence. It's not who's before you, it's the weight of the evidence. In Mumia's case, it obviously, you know, the scales were tampered with.
All of the problems that we saw in Mumia's case characterize the thousands of cases that go through the criminal justice system, through our courts every day. It's really a kind of new Jim Crow. A people's movement is essential to keep word of his case alive so that the mistakes that plagued his case are not repeated for others in the decades to come.
Every one of these innocence cases educates the public, the future juries of the United States, that this system isn't what they read about in the civics class. Juries walk in the courtrooms right now thinking the justice is going on in here. That they think that, you know, the judge is honest, they think this prosecutor's a good guy, and that the cops don't lie. And then you keep showing case after case of this, that these cops do cheat, that the judges can be biased, and that eyewitnesses lie under oath.
Take a look at this disturbing video in Philadelphia. It is a confrontation between Philadelphia police officers and three men, and as you can see, the officers are seen on tape hitting the men with batons and kicking them while they were on the ground.
The systemic injustice is what I've talked about. The prosecutorial misconduct, the police malfeasance, the bias by judges. You see these things replicated in case after case after case after case in Philadelphia. In my mind, there's clear issues that merit a civil rights investigation. And at this point, they are just asking Holder to investigate. They're not asking him to take action. Take a look at it and you tell us what you see.
I don't know if Mumia did or didn't. My thing is, if there is evidence to say that he did, why not a new trial? Because if the evidence proves again that he did, it'll be all over.
For our family, we've been on hold, waiting for Mumia to come home. We expect Mumia to come home.
What would I be doing? Honestly, I can barely imagine. I'd probably be a fat and happy grandfather, babysitting a house full of grandkids, along with grandmom. What moved me, what touched me? I was always elated by the wave of love that I felt from people all around the world. In a time and in a place where you are the most alone in your life, I felt waves of love and support. That is one of the most amazing sensations in my life.
So we are sending waves of love and support to Mumia right now. And we are again joined by professor and director of the movie you just watched, Justice on Trial, Professor Johanna Fernandez, who is in conversation, a continued conversation with UC Santa Cruz undergraduate student in the History of Consciousness Department, Citlali Aparicio. If you have any questions for Johanna or anyone else, you can type them in the chat. So I'm now going to be turning it over to Johanna and Citlali.
Thank you, Santiago. And since we're running out of time, I'm just going to hop into my final question. So the calls to free Mumia often lend themselves and extend to calls to free all prisoners and all political prisoners. So how do you think the struggle to free Mumia strengthens the call to release all political prisoners and ultimately abolish the carceral state? So I don't think you're unmuted, Johanna.
We can't hear you, Johanna. All right, I think we might get a call in from Johanna. Just bear with us.
In the meantime, does anyone have any questions in the chat that they'd like to discuss or?
Right, I think we need to get somebody to unmute Johanna or give them permission to be co-host.
Okay, someone unmuted me. I wasn't able to unmute myself. So the question is, first of all, I'd like to get folks' reactions to the film, questions, but you know, if you look at the film and if you study the case, you'll note that all of the violations in Mumia's case, prosecutorial misconduct, police corruption, and tampering with evidence to obtain a conviction, over sentencing, discrimination in jury selection, judicial bias, all of these are the same violations that collectively brought us to mass incarceration. So Mumia's case is a microcosm of everything that's wrong with the criminal justice system. And at the same time, it's a special case because it's a political case involving a former Black Panther that had been persecuted and the subject of FBI surveillance since he was 14 and joined the Black Panther Party. So Mumia is a political prisoner. The state essentially wants to make an example out of him for his generation and those that followed him, which is that if you dare challenge the state, this is what will happen to you. And throughout American history, there have been show trials of radicals, the Haymarket martyrs of the late 19th century, the Sacco and Vanzetti case, the anarchists of the early part of the 20th century, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, the communists who were executed in the 1950s. And in the post-civil rights movement era, Mumia was the radical who was put to death, who the state attempted to kill, to execute, but an international movement saved his life. So Mumia's case has all of the violations that have gotten us to this moment of hyper incarceration of people of color, but it's also a political case. He's a prisoner of the state for political reasons. And Mumia's case is important because he's known the world over. A new generation of young people probably don't know about his case, but there are 2 streets named after him in France. The European Parliament has made a statement formally in his support. Desmond Tutu, Mandela, all of these international figures have made statements in support of Mumia. Mumia is known, and a victory in this case would deal a blow to the criminal justice system in the United States. And I think the state knows that. Pennsylvania knows that if the truth comes out about Mumia's case, heads are gonna roll. And so that's why it's important. It would also mean victory. So our struggles are nourished by analysis of root causes of social problems, but they're also nourished and they need victories. And this would be a very public victory against the carceral state.
Thank you, Johanna. And now I'd like to open up the floor for questions, comments, or reactions to the film, to what Johanna has shared with us, to what Pam or any of the other speakers have contributed to this conversation. And that can be shared in the chat, or if you can unmute yourself and say something, if that's an option.
Also, what did people think about Mumia's statement? And before we move forward, and I encourage questions and comments or observations, Pam Africa has been one of the most powerful forces in this movement, who's kept Mumia's case alive and a movement active and in the streets. So if Mumia is alive today, it's because of a movement on the ground that has fought to keep him alive. But it's also a product of the leadership of people like Pam Africa, who's unequivocal and clear about the fact that Mumia is going to be freed and his life saved through a struggle from below. And she's been right about that every time. Any questions? People shouldn't be shy. Come on, this is a university.
Yeah. If you can also raise your hand if you want to ask a question. We prefer folks to ask the question over voice instead of text, but you can also text your question in the chat. That's open now. So we have Kobe raising their hand. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I won't be able to make the meeting tonight, but will there be future opportunities to get involved in like that specifically?
Absolutely. So we meet fairly regularly. There will be many events in the run-up to Mumia's birthday and opportunities to organize something in California or on campus for his birthday. But it seems that the Mumia movement is about to crank up its intervention around this COVID situation. So absolutely, you should stay in touch. Make sure you sign up. I hope that there's some kind of sign-in sheet for all of the wonderful people who are part of this meeting. And
yeah. Oh, sorry. But yeah, we have folks' emails, so we're going to be following up with a ton of information, including the next event, how to get involved, social media links, and all of that. And then we've also got another meetup during the first week of spring quarter. So that is definitely an opportunity to get involved and be a part of this work. We've also got, we've got a lot of amazing people in this call today as well. We've got Julia Wright, who is Richard Wright's daughter. And she commented, "The unholy alliance between the police, state, and COINTELPRO is being uncovered today by the Fred Hampton film and the news of FBI and New York Police Department implication in Malcolm X's death." So thank you, Julia, for that comment. We've got Brother Shep, who is a veteran Black Panther on stack. Brother Shep, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can go ask a question.
Yeah, peace. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a note. The demonization of Mumia and Panthers in general, by the media and by the police, saying that he assassinated the cop and shot him in the head 4 times. That's something we always need to look at. They said the same thing about Asada and Julia mentioning that Fred Hampton film. People who saw it, you saw the same thing there, where Jake, the cop was begging for his life and Jake shot him in the head. That never happened. We were always trained to treat prisoners with dignity and not to torture them or do anything like that. So that's a subliminal message I think that's put out there by Hollywood. So folks should really be careful when they see scenes and things like that, because Mumia never would have done that, and Jake definitely did not do that in Chicago. I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Brother Shep. We've also got Jamal Jr., who is on the call. Would you mind introducing yourself? And it sounded like you have a question or a comment.
Hey, how you guys doing? I might get interrupted by my 4-year-old, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I was going to comment mostly like just on the film and just a lot of things that were said. Well, when we're talking about continuing on in the struggle, in the movement, and continuing, fight for, like justice. And when we're talking about fighting against like racial inequities, especially in the criminal justice system, I think it was stated in a movie that like Mumia's case is a case that that we have to stay vocal and have to keep at the forefront to prevent it from happening to others who come behind her. And that's very true. That's very true. It takes cases like Mumia, and you look at the grotesque liberties that they've taken, especially to keep him incarcerated, to initially get him incarcerated, and they weaponize semantics and words with others that they feel like are like him. Right? We cannot forget the people that are still behind bars, the people that are still, fighting this fight, still being vocal, in a world that would rather like leave them, behind. And it sucks to say, but I have conversations with people all the time, about like, the social justice movements, especially the ones that were, on fire in 2020. And I always look at this as a whole. I don't look at it as one case, right? Because the disease is systemic and systematic racism. The disease is capitalism, and the disease is using Black bodies to fund and support these systems that that have been I don't want to say outlasted, but that are just doesn't represent the people of America today, right? When this Constitution was written, it's supposed to represent a certain type of people, but like hundreds of years later, we're still having this this white supremacy mindset, on all the laws and all the things that was going on, and we need to actively and be vocally just doing our best to make it so that this doesn't last past our generation. And we do ask for you guys. We ask for you guys, the educated youth. We ask for everyone to be full court press on this, right? And I know, I do know that so much easier to fall asleep and so much easier to just come to like the creature comforts that surround us. But we have a job to do, right? We have a job to do for ourselves, our children, the people that came before us, and and by hell or high water, we're gonna get that job done.
That's right. Thank you for that comment. And that was Jamal Jr., who is Mumia's grandson, speaking. So thank you for being on the call. We've got Miss Lanika up next, and then after that, we're gonna hear from Atno Smith, who is another veteran Black Panther. So Miss Lanika.
I was curious as to the judges who were in power at that time, what affiliation politically did they end up having it then afterwards? And what about now?
Should I answer that question now, or should we have veteran Panther Atno Smith speak first? Maybe we should have speak.
Yeah. Yeah, Atno, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see me?
I can
yes,
see.
We can see you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've been on a lot of Black History Zooms, and I noticed that young people are talking about Jesus Christ, and they're talking about voting, but I don't want to confront them on those particular subjects that they seem to be enlightened by, but there is something we can get out of it. One of the things that is holding back Sundiata Acoli, who is another Black Panther who is incarcerated, who just celebrated his 84th birthday, is the parole boards. Now, you can see Governor Cuomo made some changes in the parole board, and that resulted in some senior prisoners coming out. Donald Trump's not going to give paroles out to anybody that is progressive. And the thing you have to understand about Sunni Acoli is that he is a person that the FOP and the PBA hate. And who is on the majority of these parole boards? In New Jersey, you have majority is law enforcement. Now you saw when Cuomo put a couple of social workers on there that it tended to tilt a little bit. But, in New Jersey, it's still heavily in parole boards and by religious people who support the governor. So, the governor plays a role in this also. So, I think that if young people are going to vote and they're going to participate in elections, that they should scrutinize these candidates and see what they can do to benefit political prisoners. Because, parole boards play a major role in that. And the FOP and the PBA, we're fighting them in New Jersey. We're fighting them over civilian review boards. They're a fascist organization, a fascist union organization. And don't get me wrong, I'm a union man, but they're a bunch of thugs that tend to see the law the way they see it. And there's no other way except their way of seeing the law. So, I would encourage people, if you're going to vote for somebody that's going to do something to support Mumia, something that's going to do something, support Polter, and somebody that's going to support political prisoners.
Yes. Go ahead, Donna.
I think that you agree, Edno, that that the cops have no place in the union movement. They have historically been hired to break worker struggles. They've historically protected private property, among other things. But I think part of the challenge, and I know that you agree, is that in a state like Philadelphia, in a state like Pennsylvania, both Democrats and Republicans have gone after Mumia with a vengeance. In fact, it was the Democratic Party that built its power in Pennsylvania on the back of Mumia's execution, not even incarceration, his execution. Politician after politician, Democratic politician, rose up the ranks through this fear-mongering around cop killers. And I think you raise the issue of other political prisoners. there's a whole generation of imprisoned people, mostly veteran Black Panthers, who are there for political reasons. And I think that there's an opportunity in this moment for the Black Lives Matter movement to amplify the profiles of all of these prisoners. And all of the political prisoners who've been freed have been freed because there was a committee that did everything within its power to amplify the stories of these political prisoners, to hire lawyers, and to keep prisoners, political prisoners, alive. I mean, in terms of people visiting them and sending them funds, etc. I think that we need to put pressure in terms of Mumia's case on Krasner, on the DA of Philadelphia, who should not be prosecuting Mumia. Because in prosecuting Mumia, he is upholding the progressive DA over 50 years of white supremacist court rulings against Mumia and everything Mumia represents. The governor can potentially pardon Mumia. So that's another, definitely another target. Judge after judge in Mumia's case has been literally funded by the Fraternal Order of Police. So I lived in Pittsburgh for 2 years. That's how I started visiting Mumia over 15 years ago. Mumia was at SCI Mahanoy, a supermax prison that houses death row in Pennsylvania, only an hour away from Pittsburgh. And one day I was up at night and I see these ads from judges who are essentially campaigning to be elected. And I'm like shocked. Pennsylvania is one of the states in which its judges run for office. And if you're running for office, you need to raise funds. And how do they raise funds? Through the Fraternal Order of Police. The Fraternal Order of Police pretty much funds across the board the judiciary. And the judges that prosecute, that heard Mumia's case, like Judge Albert Sabo, but also Ron Castile. These were people who weren't only supported financially by the Fraternal Order of Police, they had been under sheriffs in Pennsylvania. So it's an issue of asking the goat to watch the lettuce. There can be absolutely no justice in this in these trials, but of course the criminal justice system is not about justice. It's about warehousing the people at the bottom of society and the most persecuted people in society, especially African Americans. These judges continue to be either part of the Democratic Party or Republican Party, in both cases supported by the Fraternal Order of Police, their campaigns. The only judge in the history of this case at the level of the state that has sided with Mumia was Leon Tucker. And it's no surprise that it happened at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, after we stacked the courtroom day in and day out with masses of people inside and outside the courtroom. So pressure in the streets is hugely important. In the media. This is a moment for artists, for videographers, for students to demand that UC Santa Cruz and that the UC system take a stand in support of their student. If you allowed him to be a PhD student in your program, then you need to support him. You need to stand behind him. And you need to make a public statement about the 49-year history of white supremacist persecution of veteran members of the Black Panther Party in the courts of the United States. And that's Mumia, that's Sundiata Acoli, and that's a whole bunch of other veteran Black Panthers who collectively have served hundreds of years in prison. Why? For daring to take a stand against killer cops, for daring to expose the terror, not of the KKK, but of the police, for daring to say that the descendants of enslaved Africans have a right to armed self-defense against the terror of the police and white supremacists in this country. And for that, they paid the highest price. A large number of them were killed in the streets by the cops, and another subset of them were imprisoned.
Yeah, and to
I don't know
the
if you're
list.
privy.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if you're privy to how old you are, but you know, I go all the way back to New Haven when Bobby Seale was on trial for his life. So you know, I understand how it is to deal with the whole college base, but you know, we actually need students to step up to it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Russell Maroon
No.
Shotes, we need to name them, absolutely. Russell Maroon Shotes.
Russell Maroon Shotes, Leonard Peltier, Mutulu Shakur, Jalil Muntakim, Jamil Alamin, David Gilbert, Ed Poindexter, Chip Fitzgerald, Sundiata Acoli, Kenny Whitmore, and the list goes on and on. And I think Mumia, learning about Mumia is an entry point into learning about the many other freedom fighters who are imprisoned right now. And so I'm wondering if, Johanna, you can talk a little bit more about the role of the youth in and how we are connected to these elders who are locked away in prison right now and what they've done to progress our society forward in ways that we may not even realize.
Can I just say one thing about Mumia real quick, Johanna?
Absolutely.
When he was on death row, all the political prisoners put his case before theirs. Just want to make that clear because they said they're trying to kill our comrade. So we need to deal with Mumia before we deal with anything else. And they all put their own cases in the background, you know, so that we could get rid of that death penalty. So, I mean, that's something people should understand. So, still comrades.
So that was Brother Shep, another veteran Black Panther, who's saying that in the 1990s, Mumia, there were many veteran Black Panthers imprisoned, essentially prisoners of the state, but Mumia was the only one who was sentenced to death. And there was an execution date, August 17th, 1995. And because of the urgency of that situation, the political prisoners together and the movement behind them decided to throw their weight into the movement to stop the execution of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Young people played a pivotal role, and this is something that Pam raised at the start of this conversation. In Paris, what the young people did was that they occupied the offices of Le Monde, the major newspaper in Paris of France, in order to pressure Le Monde to cover the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal and his impending execution. Students pressured their universities to take a stand in support of Mumia, but they also organized demonstrations, sit-ins, in Philadelphia, in Oakland, at Berkeley, and in New York and in Washington, D.C. They literally put their bodies on the line. And in that period, I mean, I was young. I was in I was a graduate student in that period. And Mumia represented the Che Guevara of our time. Here was a person who had written a book, Live from Death Row, on the eve of his execution that humanized death row from the inside and exposed white supremacy in 20th century America. He was defying empire from the inside. And his voice was so chilling and so human. And I think this is the moment to revitalize Mumia's voice, but also Sundiata's voice. Like Sundiata is one of the most humanistic political prisoners out there. They're all incredible human beings. We need to know who they are. Why? Because those who fight for justice will stand to be political prisoners. They stand to be political prisoners in the future. If we don't take a stand against the persecution of those who fight for justice today, we're online to be imprisoned tomorrow. That's what's at stake. We need to say absolutely not. We have a right to demand to be treated like human beings, and we have a right to fight for freedom. So the struggle to free political prisoners is the moral assignment of our generation for all kinds of different reasons, because we have access to the freedoms we have because of the movements last time and the sacrifices of members of the Black Panther Party, some of whom are imprisoned. And because if we don't say that in America there are political prisoners and this is who they are and this is why they were imprisoned, we're next on the chopping block. Black identity extremism, remember that? That was the name that the FBI essentially gave Black Lives Matter, Black identity extremists. And when they finish all of the congressional hearings around the January 6th occupation, you know who they're going to deploy those laws against? The left, the Black radical tradition, and those who challenge capitalism and empire. And yeah, so this is our struggle.
Well, thank you, Johanna. Are there any other questions? I think we're gonna start wrapping this event up. We wanna thank everybody for tuning in and staying with us, but I'm gonna open up the floor one more time. We've got
Julia would like to say something.
Julia Wright.
Yes.
Julia Wright is Richard Wright's daughter. So thank you so much for being here, Julia.
I just wanted to say that Maroon Schultz sent me an email the other day, and I answered back, and this is what I said to him. I said, brother, there is such a thing as sensory deprivation for you, but for us, there is such a thing as leadership deprivation. We are deprived of your leadership, brother. Thank you.
Right on.
Wow.
Thank
you,
DJ. DJ, another original member of the Black Panther Party. I just wanted to say, you mentioned Jaleel Monteking. I just wanted to say, because of our work, undying work, he's home free, and all the political prisoners that were held in New York for home free. But I want to let you know it's not an easy task. You got to keep on working and keep on working. There's going to be disappointments, but rise up and keep on working because we can bring these brothers home. All power to the people, free them all.
Free them all. I want to also mention David Gilbert, who's a white political prisoner, and Jamil Al-Amin, H. Rep Brown.
No doubt, no doubt.
H. Rep Brown, Sundiata Acoli, we need to say their names. Who else is in New York State who's responsible for developing drug addiction treatment using acupuncture?
That's Mutulu.
Mutulu Shakur. Mutulu Shakur. These are, you know, brilliant, fierce leaders who weren't only fighting against empire, they were actually articulating an idea of what a new society could look like. And for that, they were imprisoned and they threw away the key. Laura Karate.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was thinking about I'm calling from Italy. Here it's quite late. It's 50 minutes after midnight. And I was a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz that summer when we got the stay of execution for Mumia. And I was part of the Free Mumia Abu-Jamal movement in August, in that August 95. It has been a long struggle, and for Mumia and for so many political prisoners. I think also about Abdullah Öcalan, the Kurdish leader detained in a prison in an island for 22 years now by the Turkish government. I think about Nelson Mandela way before, and Gramsci. My grandmother was committed to that time. And I think besides renewing my solidarity, I think what Johanna just said is very important. You see, Santa Cruz needs to be taking a stand, taking a position. And when an institution takes a position, the newspaper will talk about this. And I think it should not be too difficult to get the university departments and the university as a whole to take a stand. I think it should be the first step to take now, as Johanna said. It's a strategic move. And I wish you all the best. Because this is a struggle that is a struggle for dignity and is a struggle for justice. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you for that statement.
Counselor Fernandez, I just wanted to mention that cover of your book, do you know where that's from?
New Jersey.
That's right. That was a Newark demonstration as a result of police murder of a Puerto Rican who was walking down the street during the Labor Day rebellion at Branchwood Park. And at that rebellion, these the two Puerto Ricans are walking down the street, and a mounted cop came and cracked one of them across the head and beat the other one. And so we were demonstrating indictment. Well, we got an indictment, but you know what the FOP did? The FOP went up there and switched cops. They knew who did it. They switched cops. And then when they went to court, the living Puerto Rican said that wasn't the guy. Of course it wasn't the guy. This was a guy that was getting ready to retire from the Newark police force and enjoy his life. Meanwhile, the citizen was murdered, and the correct person was never brought to justice. So that's what the FOP will do for you. The FOP will cover up your bloody tracks. And this is what they do in a continuing effort to deny justice to people.
Thank you for that story. Yeah, they're rats. Rats are better than cops. Rochelle McGee is another. It's the longest held Black political prisoner, I believe.
Yes.
I thought that Chip was.
Right.
Chip is
the longest held Black Panther.
Chip is the longest held Black member of the Black Panther Party.
Right.
But Michelle McGee is the longest Black political prisoner.
Right.
There you go.
He was incarcerated before the situation developed in 1970.
Right.
There you go.
Incarcerated before. What's going on, BJ?
Hey, all right, everything's good.
All right.
Well, it's pretty amazing to see all of you. This is like a reunion.
Well, the Panthers, we try to have a reunion at least once a year, definitely every 5 years, but every now and then we kick it with each other. I'm trying to get BJ and them to come up here and watch the Steeler game with me one day.
Well, hey, Johanna, anytime I get an email that say you gonna be down there teaching, I'm here, baby. That's why I'm here.
Beautiful. Who's that?
That's BJ.
Oh, BJ. Something you love.
All right.
Listen,
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the Philly
international.
Five. When we talk about political prisoners, oftentimes people zero in on Brother Maroon, which we should, right? But Brother Maroon was part of a group was called the Philly Five, and these were 5 brothers who were locked up in 1970 to 1972. Actually, Brother Maroon was the last one who was captured. He was captured in 1972. But the other 4 brothers had been incarcerated since August or September of 1970. They were part of the Black Unity Council and the Black Panther Party. One of the brothers was the brother who actually recruited me into the chapter in Philadelphia, right?
Oh, wow.
So these brothers have been incarcerated for over 50 years. And oftentimes there's no discussion about them as political prisoners for whatever reason. One of the Philly Five, one of the original Philly Five recently passed away, and that was Brother Al Joyner, Brother Otto, as he was called. And he passed away about, I do believe about 3 or 4 months ago, right? So these brothers have been incarcerated since the fall of 1970, supposedly for the same reason that Brother Maroon was subsequently arrested and convicted and incarcerated. That was supposed to be because of the killing of a police officer up in Cobbs Creek in West Philadelphia, right? And that really preceded the Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention, which was held in Philadelphia. As many of us in the Black Panther Party, we remember that. That was held.
I was there.
Exactly. So that was held in 1970 at Temple University. And there was such an uproar because Rizzo was in his prime back in those days. And he was demonizing the Black Panther Party. And he was trying to make the connection between the Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention, which came about after the release of Huey from prison. So Huey made his trip to Philadelphia and he gave this address and presentation at that point. But what had occurred around that same time was some shootings that resulted in the death of one police officer and the serious wounding of a couple of more, I do believe. And subsequently, there were several brothers who were rounded up and they've been incarcerated. It also led to the attack on our offices. Our offices of the Philadelphia chapter of the Black Panther Party were raided during this particular weekend. And, you've probably seen the photos of us, being rounded up, butt naked, stripped, the whole thing. All of this stuff is connected. And so this particular group of brothers have been incarcerated ever since then. Brother Maroon was on the run. So he was captured about 2 years later, right? But everybody else was rounded up around that same time. And they've been in jail since then. So I really think it's important to talk about the Philly Five and don't get caught on the fact that these brothers have been incarcerated again for 50 years. And they don't seek a lot of notoriety. They just go about the business of trying to continue to survive within the prison system and trying to educate and trying to teach wherever they can and trying to be free.
Yeah, we've been putting that information about JoJo and the rest of them out. So that's something that's good, for sure.
What's that? What's that, Brother Siddiqui?
Yeah, I was saying that, JoJo's been in touch with us, on a regular, and we just now getting that information on the other brothers. So.
Oh, great. Well, JoJo came, I'm trying to remember correctly. JoJo got busted, I think, that February of 1971, I do believe. February 71 or February of 70. And JoJo had just came home himself. And he hadn't even been home that long and he got busted. And so all of us were together at one time. My crew, the Philly Five, JoJo, all of us were like incarcerated together at one point. In my situation, I was only there for 10 years. But the other brothers have been incarcerated now for 50 years. And so again, we need to never forget that.
Thank you so very much, brother.
I just want to make one quick announcement. There's going to be an international tribunal this year. So folks should definitely get up on that to free political prisoners. So contact Jericho or I'll put my email in the chat.
All right, I'm going to give it back to Santiago.
Cool. Well, we're just we're all just in awe listening to this conversation unfold, and we're really blessed to have so many historic and active committed people on this call. There's a lot of information.
Historic? What, you trying to call me old, young man?
Oh, my bad. True and living. You guys are live in the flesh, No
He's OG, an old guy.
OGs, yes. With all the respect, yeah. But there's a lot of information being passed around. So we're gonna definitely save everything that's been said in the chat. We're gonna condense it, get in touch with folks to craft an email, and we'll get that email out to everybody who signed up today, everyone who tuned in, who signed up. And again, the beginning of this event, we heard from Pam Africa, and she said that Mumia thinks that he has COVID. So I really want to just center that again and bring about the urgency of this moment, of this situation, and all of this talk about what young people can do. This is a really important time to take action. So we're going to be sending yeah, we're going to be sending actionables in the email, but what you can do today is call the DA's office in Philadelphia. That's going to be 215-686-8000, and call SCI Mahanoy where Mumia is locked up. That's going to be 570-773-2158. Let's keep these phones ringing for as long as we can. Let's really give them hell, because it really makes a difference. I will say last I think it was last year around the time of Mumia's birthday, we had a phone campaign, and there were a lot of students calling in. And what happened was one of the guards said that Mumia had COVID and was rushed to the emergency room. And so everybody mobilized, and we all called in, and we flooded their phones. And it turns out that this, like, I have recordings of this guard lying about his name and lying about Mumia being rushed to the hospital. And so, but it was the power of the people who were calling and calling and calling, where they made a special exception to get Mumia out of his cell to get to the phone and tell people that he's
Right
okay.
on.
And so you know, we do have the power. And I think Johanna wanted to say one more thing. So I'm going to pass it right back to you, Johanna.
There's a lot to be learned about this case. And as Santiago said, this is a moment for action. We want you to call the DA's office, but also the prison, SCI Mahanoy. But we also want you to leave understanding that the freedom of Mumia Abu-Jamal and Russell Maroon Shoatz and Sundiata Acoli and other political prisoners is wrapped up in a larger battle against the barbarism of the system in which we live, and the fight against white supremacy and a creeping fascism in this country. The Black Panthers at the end of the 60s, Fred Hampton was pointing to a creeping fascism that was deployed, in fact, against the Black Panther Party, right? If you listen to the speeches and if you read the literature of the Black Panther Party, they have been called by academics alarmists, extremists. But in fact, part of what they argued was that white reaction came in the form of neo-fascism. White reaction to the strivings and the struggles of people of color and Native Americans and Asians and Latinos and poor white people, that white reaction to the fight for freedom came in the form of neo-fascism. And what we see with Trump is the consolidation of that white reaction to the Black Power and civil rights movements and the movements of the 60s. So ultimately, this battle is about Mumia and Black political prisoners and other political prisoners, but it's also about a struggle to civilize and humanize this country and the world. And that's why these people are imprisoned, because they believed that we could build a different world, because they were anti-capitalists, and they were talking about the fight against capitalism, but also the fight to reorganize society on the basis of human need. And this is the moment. This is the moment when all of those questions and all of those contradictions, from Texas to COVID, are being put before us. So this is a moment to join the battle, and this is the moment to really take this issue of Mumia, which is a human one, and that of other political prisoners, and take it to your local communities and organize a strategy that will bring them home.
That's right.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you so much to everybody. My uncle said that we're all stars in our given positions, and right now is a time where, you know, we need people to step up and you know, be leaders and play the positions that they're at capacity and able to do and inspired to do. And it's right now is the time. 2021 is the time to free all political prisoners. COVID is no place. Prison is no place for anybody to be during COVID. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank all of the veteran Black Panthers who have been on this call, all of the freedom fighters who have been on this call. You know, I mean, I can't, you know, thank every single one of y'all, but, you know, like, we just want to just extend our revolutionary love and solidarity and appreciation and gratitude to you all. And we want to thank Pam Africa, who was on earlier, Johanna Fernandez, and of course, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who we heard from earlier in this event. We also want to thank our sponsors, Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, Capitalism, Nature, and Socialism, Gabriela Santa Cruz, our supporters, Barrios Unidos in Santa Cruz, Feminist Studies at UC Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz Cops Off Campus, Underground Scholars, which is formerly incarcerated people studying at UC Santa Cruz and at other institutions, Anak Bayan, IAS, which is putting on a really, really powerful installation on the UC Santa Cruz campus, which is it's a solitary confinement cell that is that has a garden around it, and that's on the UC Santa Cruz campus, and it's imagined by Timothy Young, who is a falsely incarcerated man on death row right now. And so, you know, if you're in Santa Cruz, definitely look up Timothy Young's Solitary Garden. And we want to finally thank the students in the Mumia Abu-Jamal Support Collective, Christian, Will, Ariana, Sitlali, and just like so many others, like the faculty who helped make this possible, the graphic designers who made the flyers, everybody who shared this event. We thank you all. So again, you know, free all political prisoners, free Mumia Abu-Jamal, knowledge is liberation, and long live the spirit of the revolution.
Thank you, Santiago, for your fierce leadership and work. Really.
Free them all. Free them all.
Free them all.
Free them all.
That's right. Free them all. On the move, y'all.
Free them all.
See you guys.